Time to talk. Welcome to Time to Talk. Today we're talking about community with Michelle Riddle. Welcome, Michelle.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here, Leanne. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really great to see you. We've had some conversations about community and how it's changed throughout the years, and even in the last 5 years we've seen a lot of changes in our world. We were talking earlier about a story that you had about a gentleman that you lived near. Can you tell us that story today?
Yeah, I had the wonderful honor of growing up on Salt Spring Island, which is all about community. And my next door neighbor, I would have been 12 when I first met him, and he was in his 80s. And he was a Jewish physician. And he had been interned in a prison camp during World War II. And during that time, they were taking advantage of some of his skills as a physician, and he got to see some really horrendous processes. But his idea was to create community no matter what, was to share love no matter what. So an officer would bring in somebody who had been battered, who was not in good state, and he would look at the officer and see the mess that was there and imagine a bouquet of roses. And so he would feel love. The officer would calm, the person who was coming in for his care would feel supported and like there was a good process happening there. And through that, by the end of his stay, he had officers who were helping him when somebody would come in near death. They would bring them back to life. On paper, they would be dead, and they would be packed up with belongings to survive and out the back door. So he saved many, many, many lives through this community that he built in one of the places that you would never imagine.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an amazing story. So tell me what that did for you.
Yeah, it has powered my life. He taught me many, many processes that help to connect, that help to think. Another thing that he did, the first job I had was with him, and he had me in his garden, and he would ask me to do really stupid things. So take a tomato plant and put it on a roof that was slanted upside down, and then go water that plant. And so the first week I'm doing all these things he's telling me to do, thinking this is really stupid because the water's running out, the plant's falling out of its pot. Where are we going with that? What are we doing? And by the end of the week, I'm like, maybe this job isn't for me. I was pretty frustrated. He said, well, why? I said, well, some of these things I'm not understanding while you're asking me to do them. He's like, well, why are you doing them? And I'm like, well, because you're my boss and you're asking me to do them. He said, think about it. He said, why would we put a plant upside down on a slanted roof? And so his goal there was to help me critically think, help me to problem solve together, collaboratively. And so we worked through that. So when we talk about community, we're looking at a place where there's love, a place where there's connection, a place where all members can critically think and collaboratively problem solve to come to the best outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when we talk about how our world is and the changes we've had in community from way back in farming days where folks would come together and build a fence together and barn raise together and someone was sick and your neighbor would be there, to a very industrialized way of living. Where do you see us going when it comes to community and what you're talking about with connection? Like, what do you see happening in your area?
Yeah, community is the most important thing right now. Being able to connect with others for our capacity to move forward as a collective. The world has many moving pieces right now, but when we look at the simplest component, which is nature, which is how we all naturally come forward, we have everything we need. Mm-hmm. We have an abundance. We have everything we need. And as a collaborative, being able to respect what nature is offering us, being able to work with what nature is offering us, will give us the capacity to live in harmony, to flow through the years to come.
Absolutely. So give us a little bit of a nutshell on your career path to where you are now, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing now and how you're supporting and enhancing community.
So from the time I was 8 years old, I knew that I wanted to be an occupational therapist. I had a friend who had difficulty doing up zippers and laces, and I would help her if we're going out to play or whatever. And then she saw an occupational therapist, and she was able to invite a friend to come and play these games that help her build her skills back. Well, I was the friend that got to go and play these games with her. And then her skills came, and she could do up her own zipper and laces, and I thought that was really fantastic that she was able to build independence. And so I always wanted to bring that forward in the world. And the career of occupational therapy is basically creative problem solving. And so I've had, more than 30 years of doing that with all different ages and stages, but always with the goal of function, of true function, and function from a broader perspective. One of my passions is kids' brain health, and I've done a lot of work in that area. But that comes back to community as well. You're looking at the different systems, so the family system and the neighborhood system and then the community as a whole. And all of those things work together. So there's been many changes for me over the last few years, and that flow has opened up the capacity to build literal communities. So in Powell River we have several micro communities that are coming forward, and I'm involved with other larger communities with specific purpose, and that is to live in harmony with nature and each other.
That's beautiful. So explain your terminology of community and how you've helped build these communities. Give us an outline of what that looks like.
So community is a group that is working together that sees the wide view, that is able to see how important the trees are and the water is, and how that all flows together to create good soil for growing the plants that we eat and the creatures eat in order to survive. So it's looking at the broader view. It's looking at the interconnectedness between every being. When I worked with health and I'm working with the individual person, I'm looking at the interconnectedness between all the systems. So when I would help somebody head back towards a job after they'd been injured, I would be looking at how they could problem solve and how they could move in certain ways, and how they, their stamina, their heart rate, how they were able to bring all these pieces together to do what they needed to do. Community is no different. So we're looking at a gathering of all the pieces to have the puzzle fit, to have it balanced, to have each part feed the other. And when you look at the interconnectedness, you have a creation that continues to grow, that builds, that's not falling apart, that's not becoming separate, that's not battling together. And when you're going forward with a feeling of love, no matter what, then you have respect for yourself. You have the care for yourself. You have the care for everybody around you. You have the care for the land that you're standing on and the other beings that are sharing that walk with you. And so when you're looking for that in every piece, then you, again, you have a harmonious component.
So when you're looking at interconnectedness or holistic living, how does a person start? If I'm, say, living in an apartment and I have children and I have a part-time job, how do I look at building my community? Or if I'm living in a home, with 7 other people and I'm in a neighborhood that's very much white picket fenced, how would I change or look at holistic or interconnected community?
It's simpler than we think.
Okay.
But it's more difficult than we think too. So the first step is to, number one, connect. So if you live in that apartment, how do you meet your neighbors? When you go up and down the elevator, are you doing your stuff on your device? Or are you looking them in the eye and saying, hello, how are you today? So making that person-to-person connection is the first step of building community. And that's what Dr. Herman Kirschmeyer did. He would look these officers in the eye and then find something beautiful about them. He didn't have to agree with what they were doing. He didn't have to like what they were doing, but he found something to love in that exchange. And we can do that with everybody and everything. The other part of that is connecting with nature. So finding a way, no matter what, to touch nature, to feel nature, to get kids with their hands in the dirt in some way. And even living in an apartment, I've worked with groups who have not had big economic resources, and they have done things like build layers on these tiny little balconies of plants. So the kids are there with their hands in the dirt, they're planting the seeds, they're seeing the plants grow, they're eating the plants through the growing season. Their budget at the store is a lot less because now they're growing this food on their deck. They would come for the training, so they're meeting others that are like-minded, doing similar things. They can exchange seeds or seedlings together. So it's that gathering, it's the being, it's the getting together, the connecting.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And so when you say training, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so for those people, many people who live in a city are used to buying stuff. Mm-hmm. It's based on money. Mm-hmm. The living is not based on the doing, it's based on the buying. Mm-hmm. And they are very, very separated. So some of the early work that I did with families, when we talk about whole food for their kids, what is whole food? Okay, well, let's go back to that. What really is a whole food? Well, it's a whole cucumber. You can see it, you know what it is, you can smell it, you see the color, you feel the texture. So we have those bases that we can travel to. A piece of lettuce, parsley, something that you can grow, something that you can put on your windowsill and see it come to life. So teaching people how to do that, teaching them how to connect, because many people are tuned into their devices, and that's the way that they're connecting now as opposed to person to person. I had an event with some teenagers, and I was invited to go for coffee with my niece and some of her friends, and I sat down with them, and they were all talking to each other on their screens, and I'm sitting there going, hello, is there anybody out here? And so that's a step that, although technology brings us some great pieces of information, mm-hmm. it truly doesn't connect us. And in order to form our best communities, we need to be face to face. We need to be where we can feel the beings that are with us.
That's beautiful. And connection is a really big part for humans, for herds, for nature. And learning about that is amazing. So Michelle, explain to us how community is created.
Yeah, created by the process of gathering together first. So finding out who is available, inviting others to come. In Powell River, we have monthly town hall meetings. And at those meetings, we have discussion points for people to get to know each other, to know who's in their neighborhood, who's a part of this group. And we have skill building opportunities. So we're looking at, we're fairly, isolated community. I mean, there's lots of very isolated communities around this province, but 2 ferry access, potential for being without power for extended times. So we're looking at a group there that is based on being sovereign, being able to manage ourselves, being able to take care of our needs within our own little bubble. And so we're doing little workshops for each other on identifying mushrooms, or the tips off of the evergreens. What can you eat? What can you not eat? How to build a Bright Betty, which is a light that can also cook on. What happens if there is no power? Where do we go for heat, and those kinds of things. We also have a gifting society. And so with the Gifting Society, people put forward what their needs are, people put forward what their skills are, and then we mesh with that. So an example is we have a lady who has a massive garden, but she is not able to do any building herself, and she needed a fence to keep the deer out of this garden. And so a group of about 10 of us got together and built her a fence. And when I had needs in my garden, a work crew came over, we did all that. So it's sharing together. It's also including barter. So I have a system set up in my home for the neighborhood. So for the out of power, I have a wood stove that has hot water system as well. So we've got the heat, the cooking, and the hot water. And when I was putting that together, the hot water storage was given to me by a very good friend who was also a plumber. So it's this copper tank that he took out of a building that was going to be junked anyway. So I got this copper tank, and then it got set up by another friend of mine who was a fisherman who came to use like a shower and dishwasher and wash his clothes at my place. So we would trade the things. So I gave the tuna to the plumber who gave me the tank, and then the fisher who also sets up freezer systems was able to do all the hookup, so that kind of a community with the trading, with what you have, with the giving to each other. And people wonder with stuff like that how that works in terms of equitability. It's what you need, and when the needs can be met, then it's equitable. So maybe the tuna is not worth the same as a copper tank, but nobody wanted the copper tank, right? And it was just a piece of junk that was sitting around, and this guy wanted the tuna, right? And then the guy who had the tuna, so how that all moves is based on need. And if needs can be met because you care, if needs can be met because you know, then things flow between each other. And so with our town hall meetings, we bring all those things to the table, and people get to meet people they've never seen before. They get to know who's in their direct neighborhood, what they have, and what they can share between each other. And getting to know each other, getting to connect, you get to feel like you're a part, feel like you are interconnected as well. We also do a group once a week where we are talking about creating love. The last few years have created a lot of separation, and we're trying to find ways to build connection between humans. And one of the beautiful techniques that we practice is where we actually release hormones, oxytocin, which is a connection hormone. And so I use this when I walk into the grocery store. I'll look at somebody that I've never met, somebody that maybe looks stressed, like they're the most amazing being I've ever met. And they feel the oxytocin that's in me, they feel it in them, and they'll look up at me like I'm their long-lost friend with the biggest, brightest smile, and it lifts their day. And we can do that with everybody, anywhere, anytime. So building the connections, creating a feeling of love, of unconditional interconnectedness is really the goal of community.
I'm hearing that you're starting with a bit of a platform to gather folks together to see what each person has to offer. And you're bringing people back to the days where, you looked up and you said, "Can I hold the door for you, ma'am?"
Yes.
Can I help you across the street? And that sounds a little old-fashioned, but you're talking about these things like we can still do these things and come together. And then you can go as far as you need or want when it comes to, hey, I have a balcony and I've made this pallet container and I've grown a whole bunch of beans with my kids, but we can't eat all these beans. But then my car broke down, so someone that can fix my car. And I might not be able to pay you back for fixing my car, but I've given those beans to somebody else in the group. So you're talking about really trusting in a system that isn't created by a complete structure.
That's
Is
right.
that correct?
And that's the creative problem solving that comes with that, right? So if you come forward with love and critical thinking brains and are wanting to look at the collaborative effect, then the doing for others also feels really good too. So having that exchange between others is probably the most important part. And it isn't about money, and it isn't about exact dollar amounts. It's about the feeling that exists of caring for those around.
That's beautiful. So trusting a bit of the process would be a part of it. Where do you think the most integral piece to start is?
Well, like I said in the beginning, the idea of just simply connecting, finding something to love about everybody and every experience, that brings you to a place of calm. Physiologically, it releases oxytocin, and it creates an opportunity for your brain to think. So if a problem comes up, you can walk your way through that.
So if somebody's nervous, or they haven't experienced this or had any conversations about this, where do you think they should start?
I think that a simple thing is meeting somebody in their neighborhood. If you live in an apartment building, the next time you're in an elevator with somebody, say hi. Give them a smile. And walk it at your pace. If that's what you feel comfortable with, maybe the next time you'll have a bit of a conversation. Simply by having those connections, though, most people tend to start a little bit more of a conversation because we've been so removed. We're stuck at our devices, we're stuck in our boxes, we're not making those connections with each other. And humans need that. All living beings need that. And there's been incredible studies with plants, of how when you give the plant love, it flourishes, as opposed to a plant that you ignore. You give it water, but that's it, right? And every living thing requires love.
So would you think that if someone who hasn't, say, been out of their home for a while or can't leave their home, that maybe starting something like growing something would be a start? Do you have any other thoughts or ideas for someone who's not quite ready to take that step on the elevator?
Yeah, so finding an interest, finding somewhere to connect. When they go perhaps outside, having them look at the leaves or smell the air or feel the breeze. Just pay attention to the environment that they're in, to feel a connection with the earth and what is around. Being able to, if they're in their apartment and that's where they need to be, having the plants is very, very helpful. They have to have interactions in some way to get their food. Even if they're ordering it, the delivery person comes, and trying to make the day better for themselves and the person they interact with. Finding a way to do that with a smile or a touch or a greeting of some sort or a moment of conversation.
That's beautiful. So in speaking about connection, having personal connection with humans, having connection with nature and the earth, if folks are trying to figure out how to do their next steps, or they want to connect with you, and maybe that's through another way, how would folks connect with you?
Yeah, I can be reached by email at michelle@resilienthealth.ca.
Excellent. Anything else you'd like to share with us before we go today?
I think the idea of coming forward from your heart, if you make each day the best day you can for yourself and for everything that you interact with, then you can't go wrong. You feel what's there, you feel the connections, you feel the love.
Thank you so much for telling us your story, from beginning to where you are now, having the conversations about community and how we are all connected and how nature takes a big part in that. Really appreciate you coming today.
Leanne, thank you.
Yeah. And thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Time to Talk.